A couple of days ago, I shot a video that caused a lot of you to comment that you thought I was being a little down on the future when it comes to our right to keep and bear arms because I flagged some of the arguments I was seeing being made by very serious people with serious law firms and lawyers to the United States Supreme Court that we have no right to keep and bear arms. And I told you that when people say this sort of thing, you have to take them at their word, that they really think we don't have a right to any of these firearms, these weapons, or the right to self-defense as I see it. Nevertheless, I want to clarify my remarks, not to take them back in any respect, but I want to give you a little bit more history about how I think the anti-gunners could and would go about taking away our guns if they had the opportunity, which they do not, I'm happy to say, today. But my purpose on this channel is not just to tell you about the news. Anyone can pull up a CNN article and tell you about it. I want to try to make you think, make you the smartest people in the room, not only when it comes to our Constitution, but where the anti-gunners may go down the road. Because only if I can tell you where I think they're going to go can we work today to stop them from getting there. And I think ultimately we can prevail in this fight for our freedoms. Stay tuned. Let's talk about some history and why it matters to you today. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and author of First They Came for the Gun Owners, the detailed account of how the anti-gunners will try to take away our gun rights, step by step, everything from the banking system, to red flag laws, to wholesale gun laws, to retail level gun laws, and more and more. The comprehensive explanation is laid out in this book, First They Came for the Gun Owners. If you don't own a copy, check it out. It's also available on Kindle and, yes, on audio books as well. All right, folks. A couple days ago, I told you that I had gone through the 38 briefs submitted on behalf of the government in the United States versus Rahimi case before the U.S. Supreme Court, the next and current major Second Amendment case before the Supreme Court. And I explained to you that what I came away with from some of the briefs was a theme that some people out there in positions of power, authority, and prestige think we have no right to have guns at all. And it's pretty clear from reading between the lines that they would like to take our guns away. And that's consistent with really the Democratic platform, right? That's why they want to ban the most popular rifle in America, the AR-15, even though it's only involved in maybe 300 homicides a year. Nevertheless, they want to take away tens of millions of these firearms. For why? For what reason? Doesn't have anything to do with crime, because it's only used in 300 crimes a year. Something like that causes 300 homicides a year. Some of them are high profile, yes. So what's the point of it? Well, it seems like there's a bigger agenda here than simply crime fighting or crime prevention, especially since a lot of the people that want to take our firearms away are the same people that are perfectly fine to let criminals walk the streets in blue cities like Chicago, San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York. So what gives? Well, I'm not going to speculate as to their motive, other than to say that it's pretty clear that there are large swaths of American society that want to take away our guns, and they're in positions of power. They're elites, academic elites, legal elites, judicial elites, media elites, political elites, and so on and so on. Not to mention the billionaire elites that want to take away our guns. So the question is, how do I think they won't do it? I think there's a bunch of ways they will do it, but I want to clarify a remark I made last week or a couple days ago and tell you how specifically I think they will do it when it comes to semi-automatic firearms. Assuming, of course, they can get a couple extra judges on the U.S. Supreme Court and get rid of Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito, and I only mention those two because they're two of the oldest people on the courts on the U.S. Supreme Court. So if they were to get rid of those two justices and bring on two additional Sotomayor's, Kagans, or Brown Jacksons, who are just going to be knee-jerk liberals on every topic, especially the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms, they will simply overrule Heller and Bruen and say there's no right to keep and bear arms, and all the lower courts will go along with it happy-pappy, no big deal, which means that will open up the floodgates for all sorts of crazy gun control laws because there'll be no check at all. And I think what the anti-gunners will do, and this is inside baseball, you want to get geeky. Well, sometimes we have to get geeky on things that make us uncomfortable. But I want to be very clear about something. I am giving you information here that sounds negative and sounds problematic, and it is. But I don't want you to get depressed because our Second Amendment movement, our gun owner movement, is stronger today than ever before. We have 27 states that recognize the permitless carry. You have YouTube channels with some prominent, important people that know more about this topic than anyone else on the planet. So you, and I are very lucky with the resources and intellectual firepower and the fact that we have over 400 million privately owned firearms and a lot of know-how on our side. And also we recognize what the other side is going to do, which is a tremendous advantage. That we know the other side wants to take away our guns, and that is a huge advantage for our team because we know the goal, and that is helpful. They can't boil the frog slowly. They've declared their intentions, and now we know, and now we can prepare. Okay, so with that said, let me tell you how I think the anti-gunners will do this. Back when I was a member of the Trump campaign in 2016, I was a media surrogate. I did a lot of talk radio back in 2016 for former President Trump now. And one of the points that I would make when I would talk to the press about various topics was how I thought Hillary Clinton would take away the guns. And I think what was going to happen, if you remember that Antonin Scalia had passed away in, I think, February 2016, the year of the election. His seat was held open because the United States Senate, thanks to Mitch McConnell and Chuck Grassley, said, we're not going to fill that seat. We're going to let the American public elect the president, and then we'll take it from there. That was very wise and courageous. And by the way, the person that Barack Obama appointed to that seat, who did not get that seat on the Supreme Court, was Merrick Garland. Merrick Garland, who was supposedly a moderate according to all press accounts. He is now the Attorney General for Joe Biden, and he's doing various things, including investigating parental groups interested in swaying school board elections and school board policy. That is the milquetoast moderate, so we were told, Merrick Garland. He was the one that was going to be the replacement for Justice Scalia, and thank God, when it comes to our right to keep and bear arms and other constitutional rights, that the Republicans in the Senate, including Mitch McConnell, stood up and stopped that from happening. And then we got Neil Gorsuch, who, of course, is supportive of the right to keep and bear arms in the Constitution as written. So with that digression, let me tell you what I thought Hillary Clinton was going to do and what I said back in 2016. I thought the way the Clintons were going to do this was Hillary Clinton would be elected. She would appoint Merrick Garland or some other radical liberal to the court. She would also take over, of course, the federal courts and appoint a bunch of radical judges throughout the court system. Then I thought what she would do is, rather than try to pass gun control legislation, was she would try to enact a series of executive orders that would then be rubber stamped by the courts, because once the executive order is through, if the courts don't knock it down, there's no real way to stop it. Especially if the party in the White House controls one of the houses of Congress, either the House or the Senate. So what I thought they were going to do is simply like this. They would say that semi-automatic firearms are readily convertible to fully automatic machine guns. Now, we know that's an absurd argument, but the reality is it doesn't matter if the ATF comes out and simply says it, throws down a bunch of gobbledygook in writing, and then the judges rubber stamp it. And that is what I thought Hillary Clinton was going to do if she became president when it came to the gun issue. She was going to declare that semi-automatic firearms were really the equivalent fully automatic firearms because they could be readily converted to become that. And by the way, today, I think we're starting to see propaganda starting in the press about these Glock switches. Now, you guys out there in the technology space and your engineers and your tinkerers, you're 1,000 times better on these topics than I could ever be. So, with that said, though, I understand what's happening here. And they're doing more and more and more stories that Glock switches allow these Glocks to be converted from semi-automatic pistols to fully automatic pistols. The reason why these stories are being promulgated and spread throughout the media is not random. In my view, the reason why they're doing this is because they want to create a record that can be relied on down the road by the ATF to say, see, these Glocks, which are simply semi-automatic handguns, can be readily converted with a Glock switch into a fully automatic firearm. Now, I'm no expert and I can't tell you how this works or why this works or any of that stuff. I can only tell you what the news reporting is that I see and why I think those news reports are being spread throughout the media. It is not random. It is not a coincidence as I see it. And that is where they're going to go. So the way I think they're going to do is exactly what I just said. They're going to say semi-automatic firearms are readily convertible into fully automatic firearms, and therefore they need to be registered as NFA items in the same way they did with the stabilizing brace issue and so on. Now, you may say to me, Mark, that is not possible. This is not realistic. You're being hyperbolic. I wish that were the case, and I hope I'm right. There's many times in my career as a high-end lawyer that I wish I were wrong. I wish my sense about a judge or a particular jury or a particular situation, I wish I were wrong, because that would be much better for my client or whatever it was I would be doing. But often I'm right. And unfortunately, I don't like to be right on stuff that's problematic, but sometimes I still have to call I have to call a ball and a strike. So we go back in time and say, is this ever occurred in American history? Is there an example of what I just described that's ever occurred, that has succeeded, that the government was able to pull off such a confiscation, crazy concept of, through executive order, stealing our property? The answer, unfortunately, is yes. I want to turn your attention to May of 1933, Executive Order 6102. Executive Order 6102 in 1933 was promulgated by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who, don't get me going on him, terrible president, but we're not going to get onto that topic right now. Set that issue aside. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, 1933, signs Executive Order 6102. What did this require? It required that all Americans had to turn in to the government or get rid of it, bring it out of the country, but they had to get rid of it. They could not possess it anymore. Gold coins, their gold bullion, their gold certificates. All of this had to be turned in to the federal government. It had to be confiscated. You had to turn it into the federal government, or I believe you could bring it overseas. You could hide it in a safe deposit box in Switzerland or France or whatever, but you could not have it in the United States as an American. Under an executive order, 6102. Did you hear what I just said? An executive order signed by the president. This was a pen and a phone before Barack Obama was even born, by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Okay? Now, this was said when you turned it in, you were paid, I think it was like $20.60 or something like that per ounce. So they gave you some currency for it. They gave you some cash for it. But I don't think that was anywhere near the market price. But set an issue aside, what if you did not turn in your gold and you were caught? Well, the crime for this executive order and violating this executive order was a $10,000 fine and or a 10-year prison sentence. Now, $10,000 in 1933 was the equivalent of somewhere on the order of magnitude of $160,000. So if you were caught with coins, gold bullion, any kind of gold, there were some very small, narrow exceptions we don't need to get into, nothing to speak about. But for anybody who was holding gold in any real quantities, guess what? If you were caught after the executive order went into effect and you didn't turn it in, $160,000 fine in American dollars today, or 10 years in prison, or both. This executive order was not repealed until the 1970s with President Ford. So yes, there is a precedent here for the president just waving his executive order magic wand to steal American property. Back then it was gold. Today it could be guns. And you may say the courts will stand up and protect their rights. But again, that assumes that we have legitimate courts that are legitimately, honestly trying to apply the law and are not outcome focused. Now, the competitive advantage I think the conservatives versus liberals have, the conservatives have, competitive disadvantage conservatives have, is I do think that our judges and our justices are trying to do the rule of law right. That is why you will sometimes see situations where Chief Justice John Roberts will side with the quote-unquote liberals. You may see Amy Coney Barrett side with the quote-unquote liberals. You may see Neil Gorsuch, when it comes to transgender rights in a particular case, side for liberals. You may see these sorts of things because the conservatives are trying to follow the rule of law wherever it may take them, policy-oriented. But when it comes to the left, judges, that's not anything that constrains them. Because if you're a lefty, an elite leftist, of which I went to school and was trained by many of them at NYU Law School, one of the premier law schools on the planet, top 3 or 4 law school in the country, very prestigious. I was taught by some of the most prominent professors and judges and lawyers on the planet, many of whom were extreme liberals. But back then they were honest liberals, and they were friendly with me and taught me quite a bit, even though they knew I wasn't a liberal. Nevertheless, the reason why I bring this up is I know how these people think, and their view of the court system is that, of course, government is a force for good. Government can do good and should do good for the American people, and courts are part of that government, which that progressive mindset embraced by the left is perfectly acceptable. So if a court feels that a political outcome is not consistent or good with a progressive cause, which they consider to be a good outcome, such as gay marriage, for example, then it is up to the courts to step into that breach and solve the problem that democracy won't solve, which is just a euphemism for saying come to an outcome that the left wants that they can't get through the we the people process. Gay marriage, again, is I think the classic example where that was outlawed across the country. Many constitutional amendments, including the Defense of Marriage Act, I think was a federal law, all that stuff. Nevertheless, the Supreme Court stepped up and said it was a constitutional right. Maybe that's good, maybe that's bad, it doesn't matter. The point, though, being that the left-wing courts, the left-wing judges, if they get control of the Supreme Court and a lot of these other courts, the Second Amendment will be written out of history. It will be reinterpreted and viewed as an inkblot. It will not be considered valid law. It will not be respected in any law enacted by anybody that's anti-gun, including the Congress, including executive orders by a future president, will be rubber stamped by these courts and these judges. That will be the outcome. And by the way, if you want to know where the anti-gunners want to take us in the modern world, you need only look at the rest of the Anglosphere. Now, we know what the Anglosphere is. The Anglosphere, of course, is basically the United States, Great Britain, or the United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand. That's the main countries in the Anglosphere. That is what, like, for example, Winston Churchill. Well, I have an action figure up for those of you asked. That's the Winston Churchill action figure. He's not there now, but he is in my, in my main studio. He's there. That's the Anglosphere. Now, if you look at what happened to Great Britain, they lost all their gun rights. You look at to Australia, they lost their gun rights. You look at New Zealand, they lost their gun rights. That is what the anti-gunners in America want. They want Americans to become like New Zealanders, Australians, and Englishmen. They want us to lose. They all had their fundamental right to keep marriage at one point as well. It's all been lost in those countries. That is the roadmap they want for our country here. Not to mention Canada. Right? One day you wake up and, pistols are apparently outlawed in Canada because of the Prime Minister Trudeau. So that is where the anti-gunners want to go. Now, of course, the problem with them when it comes to the United States is we have a lot of guns, we have a lot of smart people that support the Constitution, and most importantly, we do have a Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. So to read that out of the Constitution will be a true public thumb of the nose of the Constitution, which people will take notice of. As to what happens at that point, that will be the subject of future videos. But I just wanted you to understand and clarify and expand upon how I thought this might play out and the precedent that I think that the anti-gunners will use, because it's important that you know this, because you guys are a lot smarter than I am in many respects, and you may have some ideas and plans and thoughts that I haven't come up with. And my goal here is not to be the intellectual giant of everybody. It's just to make sure you have the information you need so that you guys can figure stuff out too, because a lot of you are a lot smarter than I am in a lot of different areas. And I want to take advantage of that because I don't want to lose my freedoms and I don't want to be a slave. I want to be a citizen just like you two. And that's a reason why, I like to talk to you about these issues, and I do some of the work that I do, including publishing articles and giving information to the lawyers, judges, intellectuals, the media, on these critical topics so they don't get led astray by anti-gun propaganda and information that is not accurate. So, all right, folks, hope you learned a little bit something here today at the Four Boxes Diner. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. Make sure you check me out on Twitter or X at Four Boxes Diner, and we'll see you again soon here at the Four Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.